Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you are in the Pacific time zone, and welcome. My name is Eli Solomon Contreras, and I am the ABA YLD Editor-in-Chief of Publications and the YLD Liaison to the ABA Hispanic Commission on Legal Rights and Responsibilities. On behalf of the ABA Young Lawyers Division and the ABA Hispanic Commission, we are thrilled to be presenting a timely panel titled From Daca Recipients to Attorneys: How Young Lawyers Navigated and Now Work in the Legal System. I, along with the rest of the webinar's planning committee, including Daryl Wilson, Valencia Herrera, Lucy Garcia, Brandy Spates, and Claudia Quintero, would like to thank all of the panelists and viewers for participating in today's webinar. You will hear more about this later, but please engage with the panelists via the Q&A function if you have questions. And I will now turn it over to my fellow planning committee member, Claudia.
Thank you, Eli. Hello, everyone. I am Claudia Quintero and currently chair of the Minorities in the Profession of the ABA YLD. In honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, we are here in collaboration with the ABA Hispanic Commission to celebrate, learn from, and lift up the voices of Latinx attorneys. Among them today here on our panel, we have a unique group of attorneys who balance the duties and responsibilities of being a young lawyer confronted with the realities of their Daca status. I'm happy to be hearing from all of these wonderful attorneys today, and I will be turning over the program to attorney Nubia Willman, attorney with the City of Chicago and founder of a popular online blog for Latinas, Uprising, who will moderate this panel for us. Thank you, Nubia.
Hi, thank you so much, Claudia and LA, and all of the folks who are watching us today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to give a quick overview of our program for the day, and then hopefully we're able to get a really robust dialogue happening because we're really excited to hear from the panelists. So excuse me if I kind of glaze over to the side as I'm looking at my notes. So I want to make sure I'm giving you all the correct information. As we begin today, we're going to have some opening remarks, especially from our panelists who are Cristel, Martinez, Pedro Villalobos, and Jose Magaña-Salgado. They'll be providing some information. I will then do a very quick presentation about Daca to make sure we level set and everyone kind of understands what we're talking about when we're discussing this relief and this program. And then we'll do a further introduction with the panelists. We want to talk to them about their experiences, both professional and personal, and how they've been able to practice with Daca and how Daca has impacted their own lives. We will then have a Q&A, and this is where I look at my notes because I want to make sure that you are able to provide us with other questions that you have. We're asking that you put your questions in the Q&A function, not the chat function. Feel free to include your name and your location, or if you wish to remain anonymous, that's okay as well. If you don't see the controls, please make sure that your screen is not idle, and then we'll address the questions at the end of the panel as time permits. Additionally, we are recording this program so that everyone who has registered is able to share it widely with their network. And so at this time, I'm very pleased to introduce Balli Torres. It's double, it's not AJ, right?
Yes, it is.
My English accent comes out sometimes, who will be giving opening remarks. Betty is the executive director of the Texas Access to Justice Foundation. She's also the chair of the ABA Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities. Betty, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nubia. Greetings, everyone. Bienvenidos. I am so pleased and honored to welcome you to today's free program, one of the many the ABA YLD and the ABA Hispanic Commission will offer. Today's topic and discussions are important as they come on the heels of Hispanic Heritage Month, which takes place from September 15th through October 15th and is really just weeks before a general election, a really important general election. As many of you know, the fate of Daca recipients, currently with 1.3 million eligible and growing every day, immigrants, people of color, and other vulnerable groups will greatly be affected, if not decided, by the results of the upcoming election. It is important that each of us viewing this webinar recognize the power and impact that we have on our families, friends, colleagues, greater communities, and certainly elections. What started as an idea among a few ABA Young Lawyer Division members turned into action, and ultimately today's webinar on Daca recipients turned attorneys. As chair of the ABA's Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities, I see a clear, direct link between the Hispanic Commission's work and this ABYLD webinar titled From Daca Recipients to Attorneys, How Young Latinx Lawyers Navigated and Now Work in the Legal System. I could not be prouder. I hope you see that today's webinar is not limited to issues regarding Latinx people. Today's webinar implicates many other issues, including women's rights, children's rights, people of color, criminal justice reform, economic and tax issues, and even admissions into institutions of higher learning and state bar associations, just to name a few. Today's webinar demonstrates how conversations on significant topics can still happen during difficult times, as in this pandemic, when we cannot be together in person. You are part of those conversations, and you can use your voice to continue those conversations after this webinar is over. Continue those conversations with your family, friends, and networks so you can educate people on these significant topics and urge them to take action, including at the polls November 3rd, or preferably by voting early, as I know I will do. Thank you for viewing today's program. With that, I'm going to turn it back to our moderator, Nubia.
Thank you so much, Betty. I'm going to live out my law professor dreams and kind of go over DACA again very briefly. And don't worry, no one's going to get cold called. So hopefully this information is useful to you. I believe you're able to see the screen. Is that correct? Of the DACA? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we'll move on to what is DACA. Folks may know it as DACA. It's really the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Deferred action is an administrative relief. It kind of is a low priority relief where immigration is essentially saying, we know you're here, but we're not going to enforce anything against you. So it's deferred action. And deferred action happens in many other capacities. It's not new with this program. You see it with temporary protected status. You see it in other types of forms within immigration. Immigration is very complex in the way that all roads lead to citizenship, right? Citizenship is Rome, and there's many, many pathways to getting to that, but they're very difficult. Not all of them are easily accessible to folks. So deferred action really became an administrative relief program for youth that had entered into the country, and we can go to the next slide, who had come into the country at a very young age and were living here undocumented. And so they really couldn't go back because they had established their lives here. We wanted to retain that youth power and those folks who had really made our communities and our cities what they are. And so in, I forgot the year, under the Obama administration, he was able to issue out the DACA, which is what we call it. And so DACA, again, is for folks who were here as young folks who were here before their 16th birthday. They had lived continuously in the United States since 2007. They had to do a complete background check. You could not have a felony or what immigration called a significant misdemeanor. There's no legal real definition on significant misdemeanor, which is another kind of aspect of immigration that can be very nebulous because it is administrative. So just adding a little bit of that extra barriers to it. And the person had to have completed high school, be enrolled in a GED program, or be a veteran of our military services in order to be eligible. DACA essentially gives folks, again, deferred action, which is protection against deportation. We can put it that way in the most simplest forms. And it also provides a work permit. The work permit is valid for 2 years. Folks who are not as well attuned to immigration and the abilities to work, without a work permit, you cannot get a social security number. Without a social security number, in many places, you cannot get a state ID, you cannot get a driver's license, and you certainly cannot work lawfully. And so being able to have a work permit really was the key for folks who were young, who were really in the graduating high school at that time. At this point in time, many of the original DACA recipients are in their early 30s. They have careers, they have mortgages, they have families. They really have been able to establish a life with that DACA program. I'm kind of all over the place with the slide, so I apologize. I think the next one, we sometimes refer to DACAs as dreamers, and I do have to mention, I have to give a shout out to the city of Chicago, because the original dreamer, Teresa Lee, is from Chicago. She was an immigrant of Korean descent who was undocumented, who was a violinist and a prodigy. And as it was time for her to go to college, she realized she wouldn't be able to afford it because she could not obtain financial aid. It's another benefit of having status. And so without financial aid, she could not go to schools. Her teachers really rallied around her. And she was one of the very first immigrants who kind of came out and said, I'm one of these young folks who are really in dire straits because I don't have access to any type of immigration relief. And so through Teresa's advocacy, she was able to get Senator Durbin to introduce the DREAM Act, which many of us heard of. And really the DREAM Act was kind of the foundation that led over to DACA. Of course, the DREAM Act never passed, unfortunately, and DACA was kind of a stopgap, which has obviously helped folks, and we'll hear about that from the panelists, but there's still a long ways to go. So in the meantime, over 800,000 folks have received DACA so far. And originally, again, the program, the work permit was valid for 2 years. So every 2 years you had to renew. And then, of course, there's lots of things happening in terms of DACA and litigation under the federal administration. Soon into this latest administration, under the Trump administration, they attempted to rescind DACA. Of course, there was a lot of back and forth. The case eventually went to the Supreme Court. And this past June, which feels like a lifetime ago, I cannot believe it was only in June, the Supreme Court came down and said that the way that they had decided to rescind it was incorrect. So it wasn't decided on the merits, it was just remanded back to say you had to follow the Administrative Policy Act correctly. And so what happened is that it was remanded back. It was not in fact terminated. And then on July 17th of 2020, a federal judge did order the Trump administration to restore DACA fully. Many folks thought that this would mean that they would in fact have to receive new applicants because there were some folks who in the very original beginnings of this program were not able to file because of the cost or because of other barriers to be able to file for that application. Of course, nothing is ever easy. And so what happened soon after was the Department of Homeland Security rescinded a partial component of DACA, again, via a memo. They rejected all the initial applications. They've rejected what's called advanced parole, which allows a person to leave and then enter lawfully, except under really dire circumstances. And they shortened the renewal period from 2 years to 1. And I want to emphasize that's really important because DACA is not free, okay? By just the basic to apply, a DACA application costs about $495. There's no fee waiver. So it's a whole almost $500 to apply. That doesn't count if you also have to pay for an attorney, which is often the case because obviously we always recommend someone to get legal counsel to submit these types of forms. That doesn't count all the nickel and diming of getting the transcript, of getting the package, of getting the copies, all of that. So every single year having to renew that really adds more barriers to folks who are really trying to just truly live their lives and who have been able to establish livelihoods and families and have helped our communities along the way. So even something so what may seem as minor to say instead of 2 years, it's now 1 is really something that is a hindrance to folks. And so it's unfortunate in my opinion that that's something that has occurred. So currently in the state of DACA today, what we're going to hear is from some of our panelists. We want to hear about their experiences. Of the 3 participants today have DACA. They are also attorneys. They have gone through the trenches with us as law colleagues who have gone to law school, all of that with this added component of not having access to our traditional routes of financial aid, of not having the ability to necessarily travel in and out of the country, of having a lot of other fears and barriers that have really had to reach down deep down into the resilience and grit to push forward. And so we're really excited, very fortunate and grateful for them to sit here today and provide this information to us because it's not easy to share stories that are personal and have impacted so many of us in so many ways. So with that, I'm going to move this over to our first panelist. 1 second. So I want to start by introducing Cristel Martinez. Cristel is let's make sure I have all the information, Cristel. She was born in Honduras and she migrated to the United States when she was 9 years old. Cristel earned her JD from Western State College of Law, where she was part of the immigration clinic and successfully argued before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. She uses her education to work toward equal access for people who are deprived. Cristel, thank you for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, because I'm in California, so it's 10 in the morning here. Thank you everyone for attending, and it's a pleasure for me to be part of events like this one, where I get to share a little bit about my story and my experience as a documented immigration attorney. But first, I want to start by asking a question. So we're going to open the polls for people to vote. And I want to see if people have an idea of what's the percentage of attorneys that are female Latina attorneys. So please vote. I think we got all the answers, and 54% said less than 2%, 31% said 5%, 8% said 7%, and 8% said more than 10. And I'm glad that most of you guys got it right. It's actually less than 2%. It's, I believe, 1.4% of attorneys are female Latina attorneys, and I'm privileged to be part of that. And I'm sure the DACA-mented female attorneys is even less. But as Nubia said, I was born in Honduras, and I came here when I was 9 years old. I attended a high school that's probably known as one of the worst high schools in Los Angeles. I lived here since I came to this country. And I was always very open about my status, as I will discuss later. And I think the reason was because my mother always told me that, yes, I was from Honduras. I was undocumented here because we had to attend immigration court. But she said, that doesn't matter. You can still be whatever you want to be. And when I was 9, I decided I wanted to be an attorney because I attended my first removal proceeding. And when I saw our attorney walked in, to me, he was like, he was saving me from having to go back to Honduras. Unfortunately, my case and my brother's case, who came with me, didn't turn out as I thought it would. In my 9-year-old mind, I thought the judge was going to say, oh, you guys are kids, your mother's here, you want to reunite with her, go ahead. But no, it wasn't like that. So we ended up getting a deportation order. We had to appeal. It was a long, very costly process for my mom. And then finally in 2012, DACA was passed and I was able to apply for DACA. By that time, I had already attended undergrad. First, I went to a community college, Glendale Community College, and then I transferred to Cal State Northridge. And throughout my undergrad career, I had to work full-time to be able to pay for my school. When I started undergrad, being DACA-mented wasn't very common, and especially schools didn't know how to assist those students, especially financially. So I had to work full-time and attend school, and I was able to graduate. When I graduated in 2012, that's when DACA passed, and I was able to get a work permit, a social, a license. So that definitely opened more doors for me. But I still had limitations because attending law school was another, I guess it was starting all over, because even though Cal State Northridge by that time had groups that were starting to develop to help other students, law school was a little different. I attended Western State Law School. And the reason I chose that school, or the school chose me, was because they had an immigration clinic. They offered me a scholarship, which to me was a must, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to pay the $40,000 a year that it cost. But the immigration clinic was what made me decide that that was the school for me, because it gave me the opportunity to work with actual cases. And then eventually they also had a 9th Circuit project that I became part of. When I started law school, it was another DACA student and I. We were the first 2 DACA students ever in school. So we kind of had to educate them about what DACA was. I couldn't afford school. Even with the scholarship, I still needed to pay for other costs. And I know we're going to talk about the financial hurdles of law school, but I was fortunate enough to apply to other scholarships, and I ended up getting a loan. I was also working full time, and I was able to graduate. And then the bar exam, which is also another monster. And all this time through law school and the bar, I felt that I didn't belong in law school because most people didn't look like me, because I was DACA minted, which also put other limitations. And the bar, when I graduated law school, I went through some personal stuff. I had the loss of my stepfather, who took his own life because of depression. And my older brother, the one who crossed with me, he was deported in 2016. So I was going through a lot. And I took the bar 3 times and I finally passed. And it was only thanks to the support of my community and my family. And I ended up working at a nonprofit. It's called Immigrant Defenders Law Center. And it was an amazing opportunity for me to work with unaccompanied minors. So just like me, many versions of me when I came here. And I worked there for 2 years, and I learned a lot. But I knew my goal was always to have my own office for different reasons. But I think one of the main reasons was that I knew my status might be a problem. And I especially knew that with the administration we have right now, anything could happen to DACA. And it did. As you heard, there's been a lot of lawsuits. The Supreme Court made a decision, but the administration is still ignoring it. So we're still in the limbo again, so many years after. So I knew I had to open my own business because my status and depended on the administration and how they felt they were going to deal with all these 800,000 plus DACA people. So last year I opened my own office, and I partnered up with 2 of my best friends from law school. And now we have a very successful small office in California. It's called Law Offices of Martinez, Nguyen, and Magaña. And I do the same work. I help unaccompanied minors. I help families who are seeking asylum, a lot from Central America, a lot from Honduras. So when I tell them I'm from Honduras, they're shocked. And we have an instant connection because they know that I know what they're going through. It's not that I've read it in a book. I've been through whatever they're going through. And the kids, when I see the kids, I tell them like I was there. I was a kid in a removal proceeding who had dreams of becoming an attorney, and I did. And when they tell me that they want to be an attorney, I tell them that they can and they will. So when I had going through my stepfather's loss and my older brother's deportation, I ended up writing to me, it was like a journal because I was going through a very dark time in my life. And that journal ended up becoming a memoir that I published in English and Spanish. It's called Muy Catracha para los Gringos, or Too American for Hondurans, because I don't know how other DACA minted folks feel, but that's how I feel. That sometimes I feel like for people from America, I'm too Hondurans, and for people from Honduras, I'm too American. But I'm gonna leave it there. Then we're gonna go to questions if you guys wanna ask questions. But again, thank you so much for being here and being willing to learn about us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cristel. Just in terms of the work that you've gone through and the stories that you're willing to share with us and that you're able to inspire the next generation of lawyers is just so inspiring. And thank you so much for providing that information to us. I want to go to our next speaker, Pedro Villalobos. Pedro is an assistant district attorney I'm sorry, my camera's not on. I apologize. So going on to Pedro, he's an assistant district attorney for the Travis County District Attorney's Office and is currently assigned to the Juvenile Division. Before that, he was an assistant county attorney for Travis County, and he was the trial team lead in the Family Violence Division. He currently serves as an appointed commissioner to the City of Austin's Ethics Review Commission, is on the National Finance Council for Vice President Joe Biden. He has been featured in Texas Monthly, Austin American Statesman, USA Today, KBUE, KXAN, and Univision, among other news outlets. Pedro was the first documented person to be licensed by the state of Texas. Eso, Pedro. Pedro, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be able to share a little bit about me and hopefully answer some questions that people may have. But the first thing I want to ask is, and I don't know if the poll is up, but true or false, Texas allows undocumented immigrants to qualify for in-state tuition at institutions of higher learning. So this is a true or false question. We'll wait a little moment for people to answer. And it looks like 86% of y'all said false. Well, in fact, it is true. And of note, Texas was the first state in the United States to allow undocumented immigrants to pay in-state tuition to attend public institutions of higher learning. And it didn't just apply to college, but it also applied to when you wanted to pursue your master's degree or if you wanted to pursue a law degree. The only requirement is that you have to have lived in Texas for 3 years before you graduated high school. And the bill was actually signed by former Republican governor and Republican presidential candidate Rick Perry. So what I really want to chat about today is kind of, when I tell you a little bit about me, is to tell you about how I was never planning on being an attorney and I was never planning on being a prosecutor, but that's kind of where I ended up. So I was brought to the United States when I was 3 years old from Mexico. I came over with my parents. I attended public schools in Texas. I grew up in Houston. And then I moved to Austin, Texas after high school to attend the University of Texas at Austin for my undergraduate degree. Initially, I ended up graduating with a degree in sports management. I initially thought that I wanted to be a sport agent. I was really into sports and really into the management business aspect of sports. However, when I was taking my courses, I realized that it wasn't something that I really wanted to be in for the long run. Although I was interested in it as an extracurricular, it wasn't something I really wanted to devote my life to. So in the summer before my junior year, I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. Should I switch majors? Do I really want to stay an extra year? Do I want to stay an extra semester to switch over to maybe be a government major, a history major, something like that? I knew, this is what I knew at that time. I knew that I did not want to stay an extra year in college or an extra semester. That was not something I was interested in. But an opportunity opened up and I was able to intern with Dr. Sarah Weddington, who was the attorney who argued Roe v. Wade. I interned for her, and really in that having that internship, it opened up my eyes that the law is really a good profession and a good avenue by which we can effectuate change. So after that, I bunkered down. I wanted to take the LSAT, and I started studying for the LSAT. Everybody's experience in becoming a lawyer is different. And for me, studying for the LSAT is by far the hardest thing about being a lawyer. I think that the LSAT is harder than taking the bar exam, but everybody's experience is different. So at this time, I took the LSAT. I really wasn't committed to going to law school because at that time, DACA did not exist. And in Texas, I had done some research, and in Texas, at a minimum, you had to have a work permit. So I've taken the LSAT once. I have I'm thinking about going to law school. I'm about to graduate with a degree that I don't think I'm going to use, and DACA doesn't exist. Well, in 2012, as was previously mentioned, President Barack Obama and the Department of Homeland Security enacted DACA. And it also gave people like me an opportunity to get a work permit. So I applied for it, and I was like, this is like the universe telling me that this is exactly what I need to do. I took the LSAT a second time so I could get a better score. I applied to law school, mainly in Texas schools, because again, I wanted to get the benefit of paying in-state tuition. Thankfully, I was accepted to the University of Texas School of Law, which is one of the 14, at that time was now it's the 15th, but it's one of the top 15 law schools in the nation. So I went in there, I got accepted, and I went in thinking, oh, I want to be an immigration attorney. I think I'm in a great position to really use my story, my life experiences to help people. Well, I did end up taking a immigration clinic at the law school, and I thoroughly enjoyed my experience, but I realized doing that it really wasn't, immigration law really wasn't for me. And it wasn't for me because it hits too close to home. And I just knew that long term, it was just going to weigh on me too much, and it wasn't going to be good for my mental health. So I decided then the following summer to go intern with the county attorney's office, which in Travis County in Austin, where I'm based out of, handles misdemeanors. We have a bifurcated system. Our district attorney handles felonies, and our county attorney handles misdemeanors. I fell in love with prosecution that summer. We're lucky enough here in Travis County to have very good elected officials who strongly believe in a progressive prosecution model. So I fell in love, and I realized that this was what I wanted to do. So fast forward to where I am now. As Nubia mentioned, I used to be an assistant county attorney, so I've handled everything from speeding tickets, DWIs, assault family violence cases. I am now a assistant district attorney in the juvenile division, and I handle different types of crimes. I still handle assault, but I also handle aggravated robberies, sexual assault, unauthorized use of motor vehicles. I handle very serious crimes, and I represent the state of Texas every day in court. In the normal times, that meant I would walk into court and announce that I am the representative of the state of Texas. Now it's done over Zoom, but every day I represent the state of Texas. And just, I want to go back to what the question I asked at the beginning was about Texas and in-state tuition. Texas was the first state to allow in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants. This was in 2001. Currently, the state of Texas is leading the effort to get rid of DACA, which is the program that has allowed me and the other panelists today to continue our profession and to keep moving forward. So in a matter of 2 decades, Texas has gone from implementing policies and programs that open up opportunities for people to now wanting to shut those same opportunities down. So I'm in a very interesting position today in which I represent the state of Texas in these very serious criminal matters. But at the same time, I know that the state of Texas, through its attorney general, is fighting against my interests. And if they are successful, I will not be able to represent the state of Texas and serve my community in the capacity of a prosecutor. And I'm more than happy to speak to anybody about my, in detail more about any question that you may have about what I do, about my application process, about how I became an attorney. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you today. And I'm an open book, so please ask me anything.
Thank you so much, Pedro. As you were speaking, and I think as Cristel is speaking, before we move on over to Jose, I want the audience to really take a moment and recognize what it would mean to our profession if we didn't have these colleagues being able to practice alongside us, just the loss to our communities and to our profession as a whole, because as we're talking consistently here, DACA is not permanent. It's not permanent, stable status. And so the fact that it can be taken away is really something that we should kind of sit with and think about, because it is going to be a tremendous loss to our profession as a whole if these folks are not able to continue to practice. So just a little editor's note there. Thank you again, Pedro. I want to now hear from our final speaker, who is Jose Magaña-Salgado. Jose founded the Masa group in 2017. He's an immigrant and minority-led boutique immigration policy consulting firm. Prior to that, Mr. Magaña-Salgado, he led the National Immigration Policy Portfolio for MALDEF. For folks who may not know, MALDEF is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. He also helped run the Immigration Policy Portfolio at the Immigrant Legal Resources Center. He is a DACA recipient and is licensed to practice in Maryland and in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's really great to hear a lot of commonalities in what the speakers have said today. A lot of times, we all think that we're kind of going through alone in these processes. And it's good to hear that there's a community of folks being supportive. As for me, I'm actually a Mexican individual. I'm a DACA recipient, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the path that I took to get where I am, including how my immigration background influenced some of the decisions that I make. And so toward the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about exactly what I do on a day-to-day basis, because even before I started this path, I didn't exactly know what I would be doing. Particularly my role as an immigration policy attorney and what the heck that means exactly. But why don't we start with the path to law school? I was actually very fortunate to get in-state tuition and scholarships in Arizona to a public university, ASU, but midway through, voters passed Proposition 300, which essentially revoked in-state tuition and financial aid for undocumented immigrants. And this happened in 2006. As a result, we had hundreds of undocumented students throughout the state of Arizona that were thrust into a position where they wouldn't be able to complete their education. And so facing those barriers, a lot of us started to organize on the grassroots level in support of the DREAM Act and immigration reform. And we started an organization that would later be known as the Arizona DREAM Act Coalition, which is still active today. Doing that kind of grassroots work, I definitely decided that I did want to do immigration related work. But I didn't know whether I wanted to do direct service work or kind of broader policy work. Regardless, I knew that that would require a law school education. And the first question for me as an undocumented individual was, can I even attend law school? Will they accept me? How will I pay for it? And so I really developed this comprehensive strategy, which has been touched upon by the other speakers, which really involved the following. The first was, and probably the most important thing, is it is ridiculous how much of an impact the LSAT has on not only your admissions, but your financial aid. Unlike a university where many times you may be applying to third-party scholarships, a large critical mass of financial aid from law schools comes from the law schools themselves. It's known as institutional financial aid. And that's really based off of your LSAT, because they want people with higher LSATs to come to their law school and therefore boost their rankings. They will give more money depending on your LSAT score. So what I really do recommend is really, if you can, take those 3 months of full-time study, take a course or do a self-guided series of books, which is what I did. And I always tell people is, if I offered you a job that you had to do for 3 months and in return you'd get $120,000, would you do that job? And that's what studying for an LSAT is, basically. You can put the multiplier effect of the work you put in there will be felt for your 3 years of law school. And so that means if you don't get a great score, you should consider, taking it again. The LSAT, like all standardized testing, is racist, but it is something that you can at least learn and improve on. From my own personal perspective as a Latino male, the full scholarships that I encountered at law schools started around the 165s. I had a 166, which is not like super good. So what I would recommend is, you don't have to necessarily follow my path, but what I did was this. I emailed every single law school in the United States and asked for a fee waiver for the application, because that adds up. Now you can do something like the LSAC because you all have DACA in certain circumstances. But if you don't, this is an option. For the 40 law schools that that offered me a fee waiver, I applied to all of them. And I applied to a series of law schools that were geographically diverse, that were ranked everywhere from very, very low to kind of very, very high. And I also applied to a mix of private and public institutions. And the reason I did this is when the bulk of those law schools accepted me, I was able to have different law schools offering me different packages. A lot of people are really wedded to going to their dream law school. And that means that maybe they have to take out loans, which often we can't, or they have to pay a lot more money. And what I say is this: if you can go to law school for free, it really doesn't matter where or what it is, as long as you can get that law degree for free. I ended up going to Waco, Texas for Baylor, which is like ranked 50 something. You know, it's not like a top tier Ivy League law school. But I went there because it was low cost of living in the city and it was free tuition for all 3 years. And even though it wasn't my dream law school, that investment has really paid off. In my professional world now, very few people care where I went to law school. It really does only matter where you interned or where you had a clerkship or where your first job out of law school was. So really apply to a lot of law schools. And if you got to go to Idaho to pay to have all 3 years free, like, do it. That's my really strong recommendation. The mistake that I see people make is they'll apply to 4 law schools and then they'll just have like 3 that won't offer a financial package and 1 that'll offer kind of like a crappy package. And you're like, okay, well, that's the financial aid that I can go. So I'm going to go with that law school. And I think that's where some of the issues arise. After law school, there was a short period where DACA was not around. So I actually worked as an independent contractor, which means that I had kind of my own little mini business. But after that, with DACA was announced, I was able to transition doing nonprofit advocacy and immigration policy for various nonprofits. DACA certainly made law licensing a lot easier. I'm not sure I would have been able to get my law license in Maryland without DACA. In DC, it made it a lot easier, but DC, I think, is a little bit more flexible. So I wouldn't need a work authorization permit to get a law license there. If I'd stayed in Texas, I probably would not have been able to get a law license without DACA because I know it's a little bit harder there. And so eventually what I ended up doing was, after using my work permit for several years, doing immigration policy. And what that basically means is I work with Congress and state and local governments. I do research. I do advocacy to try to change the laws on a broader scale to affect lots of people at the same time. During law school, I did a policy internship and a direct service internship or clerkship to kind of get a taste of both types of work. And I would definitely recommend you do that because you can kind of get an experience of what you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis. And eventually I decided I wanted to go down the policy route. And so what that means now is, you know, I write legislative language in bills, I write reports about immigration law, I develop talking points and communications. I meet with members of Congress and agencies. You know, we work with a lot of coalitions for a lot of different organizations. One of the examples that we're doing is, you know, we're advocating for expansion of professional and occupational licenses for immigrants. We're working to expand access to Obamacare for DACA recipients. We are asking the next administration to use DED and TPS for upwards of 2.2 million people. So that should kind of give you a flavor of the type of work that we do. And now, very much ironically, I don't even use my work permit anymore because once again, I started running my own consulting business. So I run my own business. I have lots of nonprofit clients and I do a lot of the same work that I did as a salaried employee, but now I do it for a lot of different people at once, which I'm very happy with. But working with a nonprofit for those 4 years was really, really essential. I think for me, it would have been a lot harder to just run my own business for an extended period of time after law school versus kind of getting that experience, building those relationships and developing that skill set through the work I did with nonprofits. So at the end of the day, immigration policy work is incredibly rewarding. I'm happy to answer any questions for the end of the presentation. And for those that are kind of curious, you know, I'll have the presenters share my email address. You all are welcome to follow up with me with individual questions after the presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose. you had some really great points, and I just have to mention, I'm not that old. It's just that the law school process takes a while to reach technology. So when I was applying, in order to get a free waiver, you had to apply online rather than paper, and then you would get a free waiver. That's how little tips and tricks to make sure we can get our free applications in. So thank you so much for everyone giving us a little bit of your own experience and life work that you've been able to do. We now want to go on to the moderated question and answer portion. As a reminder to the audience, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. Please include your name and your location, or if you wish to remain anonymous, that's okay as well. And while you think of your questions, we do have a few, so I can go ahead and get started. But I do believe some folks submitted some really great questions already. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump in. This question is really for all three of the applicants. I think, Cristel, you kind of mentioned this at the beginning because you came into the United States already almost in proceedings, so you kind of knew your status already. But for others, how did you find out about your status? What was that like in high school, if that's when you realized it? And how did that really kind of mark your path going forward? And maybe Pedro, we'll start with you.
So I guess the question is, how did I find out about that I was undocumented and how that impacted?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I knew that I was undocumented for, I guess, forever, because it was like a conversation that I think a lot of people who are undocumented have with their parents, because they tell you, oh, well, you know, like, be careful around police, or, you know, if somebody asks you, you know, where you were born, or all stuff, like, just like, you know, at least my parents had the conversation with me, so I always knew it. I think I've never felt any of the, I guess I was sheltered, so I never felt really of any of the impacts of what it really meant to be undocumented until I was applying for high school. I mean, for a college. And that was in high school. And when I ran into the, oh, you don't qualify for federal financial aid in Texas, you would also have to do what's called the TAFSA, which is the Texas version of the FAFSA form. I had to do that. So there was a whole special path and process that I had to do in order to even apply for college. And then the next big question was, how are you going to fund it? Because you're not eligible for any federal financial aid. And the state aid that you do qualify for is very minimal. At that time, this would have been in 2008, 2009, when I was graduating high school, the state financial aid was like $1,000, which it's like, that doesn't even cover even a quarter of your tuition for one semester. So that's when I really started to, you know, understand that there's bigger implications to not having a status than I was used to. And, you know, just growing up just really showed all of that to me.
Did you find that your high school counselors or teachers, were they able to guide you through this process, or was this something you had to do kind of on your own?
They had some knowledge of it because the high school that I did go to was very small. I only graduated with 18 other students. So I went to a very small high school. And in prior years, there had been some students who were undocumented who were also graduating. So the one college counselor that we did have was somewhat familiar with it. So she was some help. So it wasn't like a blind leading the blind situation. She did have some knowledge, some background to it. So I was very lucky in the sense that I did have someone who understood the process and was able to help me along the way.
Mm-hmm. And Cristel, what about you? I think you mentioned that you had a deportation order that was it was issued against you, and you were able to continue your education here. How was that process like, and were you able to find some support as you were moving on to higher education? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, that helps. Like I mentioned, we got a deportation order and we had to appeal. And then when DACA passed, I was able to close my case at admin close, which is very common for other DACAs who had an open case. They're admin close right now. In high school, most students were undocumented like me. So to me, it was the norm. When I attended community college in Cal State Northridge, it was a little bit different. There were other DACA students, but a lot of them wouldn't share that they were DACA, and I respect that. And I had to work. I was working 72 hours a week when I was going to undergrad. So I couldn't really participate or engage with other students because I was just trying to survive. And then law school, like I said, it was only another DACA student and I, the first DACA students that attended that school. So they didn't even know what DACA was. And I know we're gonna talk about financing later, but for law school, I had to kind of explain to them my need, I guess my special need, and that I was different from other students. But it was difficult. Fortunately, it had an immigration clinic, so there were other professors who knew about DACA and were educated and were very supportive.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting when you mentioned that, when you talk about working 72 hours and not being able to engage with other students. While some of us remember those times as really fun, and that's something that maybe you feel missed out on, that's also a time where we're building those networks, right? Those folks eventually become your colleagues and you know them in those different spheres. But I think not to segue too much, and we'll let Jose also answer the question, but Cristel, like, what is some ways that you worked on building that network that many of us just sort of take for granted because you weren't able to engage with folks as much?
Well, I didn't have networks, and that's why I say the community and my family, that's the reason why I was able to graduate law school, because their support. But I unfortunately I didn't have networks. I was just very open about my story, so people knew that I was DACA, and some people would offer me jobs, but before DACA I wasn't able to work. So I had to, once I graduated law school, and I think that's why I chose one with an immigration clinic, that I knew they were going to have some kind of knowledge and they were going to have some kind of network that I was going to like attach to, because I wasn't able to build that up when I was in undergrad or even law school, because I was also working.
Yeah, no, that's super tough. Jose, I wanna move on to you. You seem very savvy to be able to email all the schools to understand you needed to ask for financial or a fee waiver. Curious as to whether you had some guidance there, or how did you get to proceed on to higher ed? And also, if you could also share with us, when did you learn about your status?
Sure. I'll take those in reverse order.
Sure.
Like many of the other speakers, my mom had always been very straightforward about my status, so it's something that we always knew. So there wasn't any sort of big reveal. I think one of the conversations that I had with my mom really was the importance of getting an education in the hopes that one day that status issue would be resolved. And that's what I tell people, because I know a lot of people get discouraged. They're like, why should I go to school if I'm never going to be able to work? And what we have seen is this focus on education does pay off, because whether it's DACA or whether it's immigration reform coming potentially this coming year, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And when we exit that tunnel, we definitely want to have the tools to be able to succeed in this country and not be starting from scratch. In regard to the other question, back when I was applying, there really wasn't a lot of guidance or materials regarding how to go about this. So it really was a lot of trial and error. Now, through resources like Immigrants Rising and the experiences that other folks have had, it's been super, super enlightful to see some of those roadmaps mapped out. So, I mean, when it came to talking with financial aid departments and admissions departments, a lot of them didn't even understand what immigration status was, what a lack of immigration status entailed. And in many times you had to do your own research, because a lot of times for admissions people or financial aid people, if they don't understand something, it's very easy for them to say, no, we're not going to accept you, or you can't get financial aid, because that's easier than them doing the work and actually figuring out what their policy is. I think it's gotten a little bit better with the prevalence of DACA, but I would definitely encourage you all, when you all hit a wall or someone that doesn't understand, find someone above them or find someone else. Don't just give up. Definitely put in the work, because you're the one that's going to have to put in the work oftentimes when they don't.
That's such an important message. I think we often forget about that self-advocacy because we feel folks in higher ed in those administrative roles have just such high positions of power. So I think it's just to reemphasize the need to say, it's a no, it's a challenge to see if you can keep going and get the right answer that you need. I want to ask a little bit about stigma, if you've experienced it and how you were able to overcome that. Cristel, I want to start with you. Again, you've been very open about your status and your history, even writing the memoir and sharing it with your community and with everyone. Has there ever been a moment in your career, either or even in school, where there was an issue, and I'm sure there are, where there was an issue about your status, and how were you able to overcome that?
Oh yeah, I can think of a lot of them, but I think one that sticks with me, and it wasn't even about my status. It was about me being Latina and having an accent. The people who have attended law school know that in the first year you have to do oral arguments. And in my school, then they picked the top 8 and then they picked the best one. And I remember we came to law school because they were gonna let the others know who the top 8 were. And I was one that got picked for top 8. And I remember this girl, white girl with a lot of white friends in law school. And she literally asked everyone if they had made it to top 8. And I was the last person she asked because she probably thought I wasn't gonna make it. And I did, and that stuck with me. So once we got picked for top 8, it was my mission to get best oralist. So I worked my ass off and I did. I got Best Oralist Award, and that story sticks with me and my group of friends who were all Latinos. And out of my group of friends who were about 10, 4 of us made it to top 8. So that just goes to show that what hard work pays off. And yes, I still have an accent, and I'm okay with that. And I still don't look like an attorney. And now when I go to court, doesn't happen too often to me, but one of my partners who's also Latina, and she's making line in the attorney line, and they tell her, oh, if you're a client, the line's over there, or if you're an interpreter, the line's over there. And we still talk about this because if it was a white male, even if he wasn't an attorney and it was in the attorney line, he wouldn't be questioned. So, I mean, we live with this every day, but it's okay. I have fun taking out my bar card and telling them I am an attorney, so I'm in the right line.
I want to ask the other folks too about any stigmas that you've experienced, but I don't want to lose this thought. Jose and Pedro, often for the Latina lawyers, we're often confused as the interpreter. And I'm curious what the man counterpart confusion is when you go into court. What are you confused as? Also the interpreter or the client, or what is the experience that you often have when you're othered?
In my profession, I've been confused twice for the defendant. So, which is, I'm like, no, I'm actually here as a prosecutor.
Your colleague, yeah.
Yeah, I'm your colleague. Yeah, anyways. But I just, it's going back to, one of the themes that we've been talking about. It's kind of like, I don't let other people define who I am or hold me back. Like, they can confuse me for all they want, but the moment that I stand up at the council table and announce that I'm a representative of the state of Texas, that speaks for itself as to who I am and what I've achieved. So
that's perfect. Jose, yeah, similar experiences to what you've been confused as.
Got it. So I actually don't go into court for the work that I do. The dynamic that I have is very different. I'll flag 2 things. One, as a light-skinned Mexican, I'm super privileged to be able to pass, and I don't face as much of that discrimination. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've had a little bit of success. But 2, even skin color aside, when you go to law school, when you do this work, there will just be certain disconnects. So for example, one of my favorites, which was brought up, which was reminded by Cristel's story, was I was going to law school and they put us all in a Facebook group, and I was asking questions about strategies to work while going to law school because I still needed to work to pay for food and rent. And one of the law students messaged me and she's like, you really shouldn't work during law school. The ABA doesn't recommend it and you probably won't be allowed. And I'm just like, who is this person? And just this complete disconnect of, there are just people who come from a very, very different background and just will not understand some of the trial and tribulations that we have to go through. And in a way, I think that makes us stronger because we have to overcome more barriers. And when we do, it's much more impressive.
That's such a great point. And I want to ask folks, that culture shock that we experience when we start law school, right? Because it's a very exclusive program. It's small c conservative. It has a lot of really bizarre customs that we may not be used to. And for many of us who maybe grew up low income, who are first generation, who then also have DACA, so they don't have the ability to access FAFSA, which is just a godsend if you're able to get it. What are some of the ways that you would recommend someone who's a DACA student about to start law school to kind of, shoulder themselves as they get into this really bizarre 3-year experience? What's something that you would tell them as they begin their, well, maybe about to enter their first final round for the current 1Ls? And I'll start with Pedro, if you don't mind.
Definitely. I think the most important, law school, it's its own different beast. For me, my undergraduate career did not prepare me at all for law school. So the thing that I always tell people, especially if you're undocumented, that is very important, is that you need to surround yourself with a good support system. And that could be your family, that could be your friends, that could be your new friends that you make in law school. But not only are you going through this very tough experience of being a law student and learning the Socratic method and learning how to think like a lawyer and reading these, textbooks that are thousands of pages long, but you're also having to deal with the stress of either how I'm going to pay for it, how am I going to get a job afterwards, can I get licensed, are people going to think of me differently because of my status? So in order to keep those types of thoughts at bay and to be able to talk about them very openly with other people, you need to surround yourself with a strong support system who's going to be able to hear you out and also bring you down whenever you get into your head. That would be the advice that I would give people.
Okay. Cristel, what about you? What advice would you have for an incoming DACA 1L?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Pedro said. Like I've mentioned before, I think it was my community and my family that gave me the strength to push through law school. And also, I guess, not to be afraid to ask for help. Even if that means going to the financial center and telling them, like, you need to, I don't know, make up a scholarship for me because I need it. And which is what happened with me. And also do a lot of research, because especially now there's so much help out there. I tell people, please do your research, please apply. It only takes a few minutes for to apply for a scholarship, and they probably get it because we're strong. If we're in law school already as documented, I mean, that says a lot about someone's character. So just keep pushing, be strong, do research, and stay grounded, like Pedro said, by having a great support system.
Yeah, I would definitely say that an acknowledgement of the importance of self-care, the importance of saving money, particularly because there's often a lot of uncertainty in our ability to work in our future. And I think for law school, really, for us, I think it's more important to finish the race than it is to win the race. I'm a smart person, but my GPA in law school was not very good compared to lots of other people. But for me, what really helped my career was getting clerkships at different nonprofits. And then my first job was basically at one of the clerkships I had in law school. No one asks about where you went to law school anymore. No one asks what your GPA was. All you need is that law degree, and that really opens up a lot of opportunities. So at the end of the day, finish the race. You don't have to be first. And the fact that we're here, we have to deal with all the obstacles that as people we have to deal with. And then on top of that, we have to deal with immigration stuff. So the fact that we are here represents that we're a group of people that have triumphed, and we will continue to triumph.
So well said. I want to shift slightly back to the DACA status and how that kind of guides sometimes the work that you're doing in your own personal lives as well. One of the questions we have is, how has being, out and proud, and how some folks say, like, out of the shadows of saying that you are documented, that you were in fact at one time undocumented, how has that impacted your, has there ever been a time where you're also fearful of being out and how it would impact your family? It's for folks in the audience, you may be unaware, there is the possibility of mixed status families. There's very possible where families have citizens, folks who are undocumented, folks with other types of immigration status. And so again, as I mentioned, all those roads leading to citizenship are very varied. How has that ever been something where you think about, maybe Pedro, starting with you, who lives in Texas, who, yes, at one point was a leader and now is leading the fight kind of in the opposite way. Has there ever been a time where you've been concerned about your family and especially of you being out about your immigration status?
Yeah, definitely. I actually wasn't, I mean, yes, I have been concerned, and I actually wasn't like open about my status with people until I started to apply to law school. So like even through my college, like people knew, like it wasn't like I was hiding it, but I also wasn't like, you know, flashing it and like telling my story and doing these types of panels. When I started going through the law school process, and all that stuff really opened up my eyes and saying there is a certain type of protection that comes from being so open. But I think that openness is up to the individual, because while I'm open about my status, what I do, and I can proudly say like I work for the Travis County District Attorney's Office, I'm never going to talk about my parents or identify them by their names, because there's a certain level of open that I can be about myself, but not about my family. So it's I guess it's a very convoluted answer. It's like, yes, I have been closed about who I am. I finally decided to be open about who I am because I found that there was protection and that people needed to hear my story and stories like mine. But you also have to figure out what limits you have to telling your story in order to protect the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jose, is that a similar experience with you and your family? You know, obviously having to take those precautions to protect one another.
Yeah, and so for example, my family lives in Arizona, which for the longest time was a very anti-immigrant state. And so whatever I can do to kind of support my family, if immigration reform is going to happen, you know, I will be sitting down with my mom and I will be helping her fill out the application to get her status. So just I think a sort of gratitude to your family for everything they did to get you where you are, whether that's being able to provide some financial support, emotional support, immigration support. And at the end of the day, you know, sitting down with your family, and for those that are citizens, making sure that they're voting in Arizona, or those who are not, making sure that they're aware of their rights, and, you know, where they can get driver's licenses and walking them through that. Those proactive steps go a long way to making sure that your family is protected.
Thank you. Yeah. And Cristel, also your family, I think you mentioned you and your brother unfortunately was deported in 2016, and your mom, it seems like perhaps just my old immigration practicing brain tells me that perhaps she was here prior to your arrival, and that's why you both were placed in proceedings and she was perhaps not. Very complicated, again, immigration law. Would you be willing to share a little bit about what you being out, and again, even writing about your story, how has that impacted your own family?
Yeah, of course. And I understand where Pedro's coming from about protecting his family. And unfortunately, I couldn't do that because my mom is a TPS holder. As you guys know, it's similar to DACA, but it has been taken away as well. And then my older brother, who came with me, ended up getting deported. And that's something that I talk about in my memoir. And I am the way I am because my mom raised me to be that way. So to her, status was never a factor in our lives. And I know Jose mentioned that getting an education was the goal, because if in case some immigration reform happened, to my mom, it was, you get an education because if you get deported, you're going to have an education and nobody takes that away from you. So it was a different mentality. Of course, we take precautions. It's not like I'm going to make my address public, but I do talk about my mom's story because I feel her story is even more amazing than mine. And it is because of her that I am as open, and I want to say as strong as I am, because that's how she raised me. And she told me that I had to use my status as a strength, not a weakness. So people know that I'm DACA and people know she's a TPS holder. And I have a younger sister who's a US citizen, and I talk to her about it. We go to marches, and I tell her what are the risks that we run because we weren't born here, because I want her to understand the privilege that she has as a US citizen, even though she's just 10.
Great, you got to start them early. No, I love that. One of my questions I have is when we talk about the connection that you're able to with your clients. So Cristel, you mentioned that you have a lot of clients who are also from Central America, who are Latino. Pedro, I'm just assuming because you're in Texas, you have a lot of Mexican American folks going through the systems on both sides. I could be wrong, maybe a lot of Polish like we have here in Chicago, let me know. And Jose, I mean, you're not actually representing clients directly, but you're doing policy work related to an issue that is so near and dear to your own life experiences. Would you be able to tell the audience, we'll start with you, Jose, how has your own personal experience bled into the work that you're doing? And have you seen that as a net positive, which I'm sure it is, because it had my own culture and ability to connect with my immigrant clients, my Latino clients have always been just a strength that I have seen in my work, and be great to see how you've been able to flesh that out in policy.
Absolutely. Initially the work is substantially more rewarding because you see people in the community, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, who are directly impacted by this work. And direct service is amazing and I love it, and we can't do policy without direct service. But for me, it's really important to be able to change some of the problematic frameworks that makes it hard for many people to obtain any sort of relief. And when talking to members of Congress or executive agencies, I'm able to kind of bring in kind of personal stories and personal knowledge. Sometimes in the context of policy advocacy, I'll incorporate my story as a DACA recipient who is an attorney. When speaking to media, I'll be able to also incorporate that as well. So you have both this approach of talking from a place of expertise, but also a place of personal knowledge as well. And I think for me personally, the work that I do is so incredibly satisfying because I'm very, very passionate about it, and because it is a way to give back to my community, and especially my mom and my family that have supported me getting here. With that being said, one of the things that I tell a lot of Latino immigrants and folks is you also don't have to do immigration, because we need Latinx and immigrant folks in all aspects. When someone says they want to go work at a private law firm and not do immigration work, I'm like, that's amazing, good. Like, we need those people there. We need representation across all sectors. So for me, while immigration was where I wanted to be, we definitely do that, need that representation everywhere.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. Now that I've started doing policy work more substantially, it's amazing to me just how many tables there are where decisions are being made and there are not enough folks that look like us. And there's plenty of attorneys at the table, but just not Latino ones. And I think that can absolutely impact the quality of services we receive. So totally encouraging, diversifying our interests, says the immigration attorney, but it is really important. Pedro, as someone who opted to do criminal law or as a prosecutor, you spoke a little bit as to why you made that decision. Can you talk a little bit more as to whether, if at all, your own background, your experiences have made things easier, different, not at all, with the work that you're doing? As again, you represent the state of Texas, not actual clients, but in your investigations, selecting the jury, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So there's two types of undocumented people that I interact with on a daily basis, and those are defendants and victims. And I should say my overarching approach to all of this is in the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, it says what the prosecutor's job is. And the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, which we take an oath to follow, says that the job of the prosecutor is to seek justice, not convictions. So I have to, that's my mandate. That's what I have to do. In regards to victims, my life experience informs me in the regards, like, I know, as you mentioned before, I was one of the team leads for the Assault Family Violence Divisions. I do get victims who are undocumented, many women who are undocumented. I know why some of them don't want to go to trial. I know why some of them don't even want to show up to court. I know why some of them just don't want to have anything to do with anything involving a government agency. So it's up to me to tell them, I understand where you're coming from. Let me explain to you how this works, and try to like calm their fears. That's in addition to the other hurdles that I have to overcome, which is like the cycle of violence. You know, the husband may be the main breadwinner. You know, a whole bunch of other stuff that I have to overcome. But there's that extra, like, they're fearful of the government, don't even want to come to the court because they've heard stories on their local station that says, oh, people are getting snatched up by ICE at courthouses. So it really gives me an opportunity to talk to them and really inform them and empower them in regards to that aspect of the case. And in defendants, like Arizona, Texas has become very anti-immigrant. And one of the laws that was passed in 2017 was the Senate Bill 4, which said that as government agencies cannot consider immigration status. We are a government agency, so in regards to prosecution, I cannot consider immigrant status when I'm doing a plea deal for a defendant. So I have to balance what justice is, and I have to balance this SB 4 mandate that I can't consider anyone's immigration status. But what the law doesn't say is that I can't consider extraneous stuff, which is this person going to get deported if they take a conviction? Or I have to consider all these collateral consequences. Will they even be able to serve out their probation term if they're deported? So I'm not really taking into consideration their immigration status, but I am taking into consideration the collateral effects of their immigration status. And the law doesn't prevent me from doing that. So it's really a weird balancing act that I have to do every day. And like I said, I deal with victims and defendants, and my life experience basically gives me a vast amount of knowledge to be able to hopefully come to a resolution that is just and fair for all sides.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want to ask one question to Cristel, and then we'll move on to the question and answer function, because I know we have some folks who submitted questions as well. Cristel, can you just give an overview with the fluctuation of immigration law, of almost a will they, won't they, all these things that are happening? How are you able to just first of all, keep going, but also make sure your clients feel empowered to submit cases? So if you have some clients who are doing affirmative cases, meaning immigration doesn't even know they're here, but they have some relief available to them, like DACA, or just so that they're able to actually fight for their cases. How are you empowering your clients in that manner?
Well, that's easy to do because most of my clients are strong individuals who come to my office with an amazing story, and who already have a life here in the US, who have kids here. So I just remind them that why they're fighting, what they're fighting for, and why they need to stay here, and their rights. You know, a lot of them, unfortunately, because of how the law is, don't have great, let's say, asylum cases. And they're afraid because they think they're gonna end up getting deported as soon as their case gets denied, per se. And I explained to them that there's a process, that like an appeal process, and at least that calms them down a little bit. Also, I try to get work permits for as many individuals as possible, because I know that opens a lot of doors and opportunities for them to provide for their families. And I share my story whenever I can, because I want them to see, them and the kids, when they come with their parents, that they are able to do whatever they want to do, even when they're in proceedings, even when they're fighting a case, even people who haven't been granted DACA, who may be qualified but never applied. And I haven't mentioned this, but I think faith in the Latino community it's big. Going to law school for me was a leap of faith. I didn't know how I was going to pay for it, but my mom, again, always still in me. You have to have faith and hope, you know, that everything's going to turn out right. You just have to work hard. So I try to remind them of just the values that I know as Latinos we have.
Looks like you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. So I'm moving on to this question and answer portion. Sorry for my fingers all over your face. This question is from Ruby Conchas. She wants to know, if the Trump administration remains and DACA ends, how will this impact your career? Are you creating a plan in case this happens? Jose, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so one of the Jesus. I hope
Easy
that
question, I know.
Everyone should be prepared for this outcome. Just because the polls are looking good does not mean anything, as we learned in 2016. With that being said, if DACA is ended, many folks will lose their work permits. So I think an understanding of what an independent contractor does, how you can convert your job to an independent contractor situation legally, I think is going to be very important for folks. Immigrants Rising has a plethora of different materials on how to start, maintain, register your own business, whether it's a sole proprietorship or an LLC. You know, it's important to know, just because you have a job now doesn't mean it can be necessarily converted to an independent contractor with your employer. You really do have to talk with them. And I would definitely start laying that foundation now, sooner rather than later, because that way they're not as shocked. And what that could mean is, if you have a job for one employee now, what you could potentially do is, if your employee is open to converting that to an independent contractorship, that would be great. If that means that you have to go half time with your current employer, so you can take on a second client and kind of run your own independent contracting business, that's an option as well. So really familiarize yourselves with the different requirements, including the business formation, to be ready to hit the ground running in case of bad news.
Pedro, what about you? This is a tough question, I'm sure. It's just, you know, but what have you been thinking of in terms of this question?
So yeah, it's obviously I wouldn't be able to work anymore for the district attorney's office, but I do fall back on being able to be a defense attorney. I think that's possible. I haven't really delved into the very minutia details about how I would go about doing that, but in the state of Texas, obviously I can register an LLC, and then there's also an international business entity designation that I would be able to get. So it would just mean it would mean that I would move from the public sector to the private sector.
And Cristel, I'm assuming you are already working with your own business with your partners. So it would probably, you stay the course, but any kind of changes that you would foresee?
No, and like I said, that's one of the reasons why I knew opening my own business had to be the path that I had to take if I wanted to be an immigration attorney representing other people. And I did a partnership, obviously, because I want to have a job in case DACA is taken away, but also to protect my clients, because I don't want their case to be just under my name and then I'm not able to represent them tomorrow. So there's two other attorneys who are obviously US citizens and are able to take the cases if we have to get to that. So I've been thinking about that since Trump got elected, because I know things can go south really fast. We've seen it happen. We've seen how they don't care what the Supreme Court says. They make their own rules. And working in immigration, I see that every week. So I do think about it. I try not to, again, define the kind of work I do, but I think it's something that we all have in mind because it's there.
Yeah. I think one of the things I want to underscore here is not only the, we'll call it a little bit of freedom that the law degree gives us. So we want to encourage folks to continue on their path to education because it does allow you some options. But I also want to remind the audience that not all the DACA recipients have, their JD or their ability to turn a job into something else that would be as lucrative or at least as stable. We're talking about folks who maybe are doctors and lawyers, but also are working in offices, or working as teachers, working in different types of capacities. It is literally hundreds of thousands of people who would be impacted if this is taken away. And we really need to be cognizant of that, because not only will it impact our profession, imagine the loss if Pedro is no longer to be able to be a prosecutor, and imagine what we'll gain if we're able to actually have some type of really structured and standard reform. We have one more question from the Q&A that I want to bring up, and that is from Oh, I think I may have missed it. Hold on one second. Okay, oh, I see. It was answered on the question. So one of the questions I'm going to go ahead and ask is, what can we do as we are just days away from an election, but the work doesn't end on November 3rd, obviously, and it doesn't end when inauguration takes place, whoever is on that podium. What do we need to do as an audience to be supportive of DACA recipients to ensure that we're able to continue to promote and provide remedies and relief so that folks are able to live their lives here in the United States? Cristel, I'll start with you.
Oh, there's so much we could do, but as Pedro and Jose have mentioned, they decided not to do the kind of work that I do because it's very, it's difficult the work to do. Having the DACA being the jeopardized with this administration, having the elections and all the other changes that we've had, to me, it's as simple. I know Pedro and Jose are going to mention other important things, but to me, it's checking on those DACA folks, you know? Like I said, the support system that I have, friends texting me like, are you okay? Or just letting me know, oh, immigration is in so-and-so place, so I can share that with my family and my clients. So I think just being supportive, like emotionally supportive, because that's something that we need. And I'm sure there's other things you guys can do, but that's what I would ask as a Latina immigration attorney. Just be supportive and be there for your DACA folks.
Thank you. Pedro and Jose, just real quick, because we've had a really great conversation and we wanted to do closing thoughts, but maybe you could include that in your closing thoughts, just what we can do to support you and other DACA recipients. Pedro? Yeah.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, in regards to supporting other DACA recipients, I think that we need to be, if you're able to provide your time or money to organizations that are going to be assisting these folks in the next coming months. As you mentioned, I'm on the National Finance Council for Vice President Joe Biden, so I'm hoping the election goes his way. And if it does, I imagine that the influx of DACA applications that are going to come in it's going to be tremendous. And most of those people are not going to have the resources to pay for the application fee. So if you're able to devote your time and help people fill out their applications, or if you're able to donate to a nonprofit who's going to be willing to pay, give people the check to pay for the application fee, like if you should do it. So if you're willing to give your time and your time or money to these organizations that are definitely going to need your assistance, please do so.
Thank you, Jose.
Yeah, and the only thing I would flag is absolutely you should do the things that the other panelists have suggested. And I think as we're advocating for DACA recipients, I think it really is important to not forget about the broader undocumented population, our parents, the folks who are young immigrants but weren't able to get DACA. We are all incredibly privileged to have DACA or have had DACA in the past. And I think it's really, really important to make sure that in our advocacy for us, we don't forget the folks that are still incredibly vulnerable, because oftentimes those are close family members or people that just miss the cutoff. So when talking about advocacy opportunities or opening up educational or employment opportunities, however we can incorporate the broader immigrant community, I think is always a wise thing to do as well.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna ask Eli and Claudia, I think we're probably wrapping up. I don't think there's time for closing remarks. If anyone just want to pop in. Or I'll take the executive decision to say, we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna give you back 1 minute. I wanna say thank you to everyone for participating, especially to our speakers, Jose, Pedro, and Cristel, for sharing your stories, for giving us information and guidance so that we can continue to be advocates alongside you. Thank you for being such amazing colleagues and representatives to the legal profession. To the audience, this is, again, a presentation from the ABA Young Lawyers Division, Minorities in the Profession, and the ABA Commission on Hispanic Legal Rights and Responsibilities. Thank you all again. Thank you to the speakers, and I'm sure you can contact any of us with any kind of questions or information you may need. Thank you. Have a good day.